Here's Mae.
Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. The time went fast. It's about 3 minutes after. Sorry about that. It is program number 502, July 19th, 1981. Losing track of time. The weeks go so fast. These nice summer days that are getting shorter with each week cause some researchers to become philosophical. I get phone calls from various people who get depressed. They don't see enough changes happening quickly, and they call sometimes just to talk about it and what's going on in the world. It isn't easy to see changes. It's hard to know if doing research is just an academic study that we do for the fun of it, or whether we really can affect changes. We don't know how much you can get done by exposing certain types of criminals to the acts that they're doing. But I think the exposing is worth it, and I think, I always hope that through the research, the various people doing this kind of work are reaching other people and opening up a new, different way to look at the world than the one you get over the accepted media, the Associated Press, United Press, and the regular wire services and television and the AM radio stations. I hope it works that way. There was a good book review of about Orwell. It's called Orwell, The Transformation, by Peter Stansky and William Abrams, and the book was reviewed in Nation recently, and they described Orwell's disillusionment with his own privileged class. And the book review goes into his disgust with fraud and corruption and cheats in the upper class, where he went to school at Eton and later worked for the British Empire in Burma, and how he discovered how contemptible these people were, that they were the most detestable people on earth, and he thought they were heartless and senseless, and he assumed that there had to be something better out there. And the description of his view of the world is about the way I see the ruling class very many times when I read the newspapers and study different documents. And then this description of Orwell, in the reviewer talking about Orwell's attitude about the working class, said that he knew nothing about this class, the alternate to the class that he hated, his own class, that he thought was senseless and cruel, must be replaced by something that must be better, the working class. And they went on to say that he never knew anything about the working class. He wanted to help them, but he never spent 10 minutes on a back street, or he would have known more about them than he wanted to know. And the article goes on, the review, to say that Orwell, Eric Blair, of course, was his name. He used the name George Orwell, described in glowing colors the other side of the fence as if it was perfect, and didn't realize that they had the same problems of wanting to achieve or obtain exactly what the people at Eton and the ruling class that he lived with had, and they were less interested in revolution than central heating or egg foo young. That was the description in the book. And then there was a quotation, the authors said, it was Orwell's tragedy to have an idealistic faith in a class which was not his own, and the tragedy of that class that could not live up to that faith. And I think sometimes that applies to many researchers who want to help the blacks, the poor, the students, the Vietnam veterans, the people who are oppressed in various countries around the world, and they want to help young people in this country to see the dangers of fascism coming. But those young people really don't want to know that. They only want some of the goodies that life has to produce, and given a chance, rather than make effective changes, they just want what the ruling class has, and they're biding their time until they get it. But in summarizing Orwell's life, these people also, these two men that reviewed the book, said it is to Orwell's credit that he should have made it for the idealist that he was, who believes in false gods that may not be the way he really would want them to be, but that sometimes is preferable to the cynic who believes in nothing at all. So I could identify with this review of the life of Orwell and what Orwell hoped to achieve, and just pass on to those of you who study history or who are researchers that I personally believe it's better to hope that those people who are the victims of fascism or oppression or unfairness in our society have the capability to understand something of what we're saying or offering, or the keys to the corruption, trying to expose the people who are stepping on them and hurting them and depriving them of their rights, it's better believe that with this information they can do something about it than to sit back and say, well, they can't do anything at all, and therefore I'm not going to bother. I'm going to just live my life the way I want, and you suffer out the way you want. I think the researcher should, who passes on in articles or letters to the editor or talk shows or buys the books that share information on these various crimes that government officials are into, those people are saying to the author, I believe in you, I believe in what you're saying, or I want to learn what you're saying, and I want to include that in my wealth of information so that hopefully I'll identify these people and maybe make some changes. And that's all we can hope for. Either you want to make society a little better and you do the work for this reason, or you just study history because it's interesting, or maybe you combine the two. It's interesting and you hope you can make some changes. Briefly, I just want to mention, and all of you who listen to this show know about the death of Harry Chapin, the songwriter, the balladeer. We were having a discussion here at KLRB before I went on the air. Was this another one of those long murders that he was snuffed out, or is just a coincidence? Another singer described in the Los Angeles Times as Associated Press article, the most social and political activist in the songwriting field currently in America. Last fall, he campaigned for 5 Republicans, 19 Democrats for Congress. He raised $6 million for hunger problems or issues. He was on President Carter's commission to investigate world hunger. He, 1980, had 250 concerts, and half of them were free. He was killed in an accident in New York City. The first article in the newspaper said songwriter's death car, and it shows the New York fireman and Harry Chapin's Volkswagen Rabbit, and it says, this is the Rabbit which plowed into a semi-trailer truck yesterday and crashed and burned and killed the 38-year-old performer who is widely known for his fight against world hunger. And then the next day, there is a photograph in the San Francisco Chronicle the day following. That one is July 17th. July the 18th, singer Chapin died driving with a revoked license, as if the piece of paper was the reason for his death. And then it shows the wreckage of his car. Rescue workers viewed the wreckage of Chapin's car, which was struck by a tractor trailer in the Long Island Expressway. And there's this huge truck that hit him from behind. And they said that he was going 15 miles an hour when this large trailer truck plowed into him, and that he had emergency lights on and was going slowly. And he died first of massive hemorrhaging in the chest cavity. He wasn't burned. The car was totally demolished. But he was described in the articles as a political activist, a person who gave free concert, who cared about political candidates, who was going off to a free concert at the time he died. He had gone to the Air Force Academy and Cornell University, an educated person using his talent as a, quotes, a social worker songwriter who did a lot of reaching out and supporting people who were less fortunate than himself. That's an Associated Press story. So Harry Chapin is gone, and we add his list to the number of musicians who have died in various ways, airplane crashes and outright murders and so-called drug overdoses. I gave a list of those musicians at the time John Lennon died. I won't repeat all 40 names now, but the list goes on, and maybe we'll update it in a month or two and just do one program on the killing of the rock musicians. There's a conference going on now, a summit in Canada. It's a different situation than the summits before when Jimmy Carter was president or Gerald Ford. We have a president whose kitchen cabinet at Stanford University and the people behind Ronald Reagan from University in Washington, D.C., and the think tanks have geared their heads towards World War III with nothing but goading the Soviet Union. And among his teamwork are people, 5 people in particular, that have been fighting each other. I named them back March 29th on the radio program here. Alexander Haig, Walter Stessel, Richard Pipes, Richard Allen, and William Casey. The next morning, the next noon, Ronald Reagan was shot, and Haig, of course, was competing with William Casey of the CIA, and they're still fighting. and there's infighting, and I listed in March the team members that were fighting each other. Now, they're fighting for control of the foreign policy. There's many articles on that. There was another story last week in the Sunday newspaper, Sunday magazine section, called "The Confusion at Foggy Bottom." And it had the men in circles at the desk of the State Department, almost identically to the people that I had named on the sheet last March. And it shows a desk with 5 people, and the article is about the Vicar of Foreign Policy, Alexander Haig, and his fighting with other members of the State Department, and who's going to have control over the decisions of the State Department. Now, the minute Ronald Reagan was president, his first speech was a violently anti-Soviet speech. When Haig gave his speech, it was anti-Soviet, and as I mentioned for many weeks on the air, every time they open their mouth, they're ready to declare World War III. But our allies aren't going along with that, and the conference is going to be very different in Canada because this is the first time that the President of the United States is going to be confronted by a whole team of people that don't agree with our policies, and he was put in by those people that expect him to follow those policies through, or they could conveniently kill him or move him out of the way if he didn't go along with those policies. But even if Ronald Reagan were to drop dead tomorrow from another shot or an infection from this one, I don't think our allies in the world would go along with the crazy people that have assembled behind Ronald Reagan and put him into office. There's an article in the Washington Post by Clayton Fritchie, Consensus Against America, and it lists the opinion of our allies on very many things. The avowed aim of the Reagan administration, this article says, is to forge a global anti-Soviet consensus. Instead, the emerging critical consensus seems to be directed against the United States. It lists the 50 nations of the Organization of African Unity against the United States and South Africa. West Germany, the marches against world tension and arms race. France's new foreign minister talking about our failures in developing underprivileged countries in the world. The decision in Pakistan to give them atomic weapons to provoke India. Japan rejecting our pressure to build up their arms, and they have many beefs against us. 4 members of the U.S. country team attached to the American embassy were expelled from Zambia as being members of the CIA, and they were kicked out. And next door in Mozambique, they kicked out other people that they said were from the CIA. And this article goes into many of the problems with the president of Mexico and our agreement or disagreement in Central America and what we're doing in El Salvador and Guatemala and the Honduras and Nicaragua. And it goes into George Bush going to Paris to admonish Mitterrand and being told, Mitterrand told him I don't have to, jiggle or dance to your tunes, or Reagan's orders. This is a time where our president is always smiling and waving and happy, but he's going to meet some people who are going to have to go into their countries and say, well, we're not going to take orders from Haig or Allen or Bush or Stessel or Pipes or any of you. And they're really afraid of American foreign policy. Another article, the White House shifts the summit duties from Bush to Deaver. Ronald Reagan isn't completely stupid. He didn't get to be president for nothing. And all of a sudden, instead of the vicar, Alexander Haig, being in charge of the Ottawa Conference, Reagan got smart and he changed away from Bush to Deputy of Staff Michael Deaver, because that's a long friend he can trust. And Haig and this gang are brutal, and I think he's figuring out what's going on there and relying on old friends instead of the team that are trying to do him in and bulldozing him with disinformation. Last time I went to Canada, and I'm sure he even knows much about the Hinkley family. If I can figure it out, I think he can figure that out too. Another article, Who's in Charge of Foreign Policy? In the New York Times, it's got Alexander Haig and Richard Allen, and it tells how former presidents handled foreign policy, how John Kennedy, Richard Nixon, and Jimmy Carter literally made decisions for themselves, that Dean Acheson, John Foster Dulles, and Henry Kissinger were the men that ran the foreign policy for Truman, Eisenhower, and Ford, but that Reagan has come to no particular course because the vicar of foreign policy, this is the New York Times, Alexander Haig, came in wanting to be crisis management, wanted to be in charge of all of foreign policy, and that he's fighting with other people in Washington, D.C., and The question is, should they give that much power to Haig? And our allies are afraid of Haig, even though he was the head of NATO, and there's a big problem there. Another article last Sunday's paper about a member of Congress, the Senate, Senator Spark Matsunaga from Hawaii, and he went to a dinner party in the White House, and Haig and the gang kept pushing him in the back room where the Japanese prime minister was the guest of honor, and the poor man kept coming out, and they pulled him in with the other Japanese, and then finally Haig went through the line and started to shake his hand, and he said, well, I was one of the people in the Senate that confirmed you. He didn't recognize the senator and put him in the back room with some Japanese guests, and there was a cartoon and an article about Haig pulling that. And the Washington Post had an editorial, an article, Reagan's Soviet Illusion, and it says Reagan is mortgaging his policy to a single, extreme, arbitrary, and historically unproven concept of Soviet power. Another article in the New York Times, speech on foreign policy being deferred by Reagan, and a cartoon in the Houston Post, Sunday, July the 5th. Ronald Reagan, it's a movie poster advertising a movie, Bedtime for Brezhnev. And it's got a picture of Nancy down below, co-starring Nancy Davis. And then there's George Bush in a cowboy hat, and Haig is a cowboy, and Henry Kissinger is a cowboy, and Gaddafi, and Brezhnev, and Castro. And it shows Ronald Reagan being really tough, far out of the West. And it shows, see dashing Ronald Reagan in his greatest and bravest role. Watch our ageless hero uphold international law and order in unprecedented fashion. And it goes on, bedtime for Brezhnev, and so forth. Thank goodness our allies, our major allies, are as much afraid of him as I am, and they're closer to where the bombs would be falling. So the conference will be interesting because our president and his advisors are going to be put on the defensive. And while they act very charming and all peace and love at this conference, other people are going to go home to their countries and have to report what is happening. And I'm sure that Haig's policy or bloodbath in Central America may be a little diluted between this and the conference in the Caribbean. He's already backing down on some of his policies, but he's mean enough right now. The newspaper, the anti-Castro Cubans, are advertising in the New York Times, Washington Post, Houston Post have articles. They're going to kill Fidel Castro. There's an anniversary of the Bay of Pigs operation, the military, the Alpha 66, trained by the CIA, the Houston Post. Castro's death will be repeated. The head of the Cuban Commando Group said that Castro will be killed by trained assassins July 26th. We'll see if that happens or not. The CIA group that said they work with the United States Army, trained in the United States, are going to try to kill Fidel Castro. I saw that in every newspaper that I take. They're quite open about it, and right now in Washington, the FBI is investigating possible violation of Neutrality Act that forbids private citizens from conducting foreign policy, but I'm sure it comes right out of the National Security Council, and they're very anxious to do it. They are planning the assassination. They say they know how to do it, and they will do it. In the meantime, there's a fever that hit Cuba. 31 people have been killed, and it was a disease. 79,000 people were sick in Cuba and 100 to 200 in Dominica. Now, that's the little island that was supposed to be invaded just recently, and I wonder if there's biological tampering there with people so their resistance is down. The reports of casualties came, interestingly enough, out of the Disease Control Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and also the other one out of Fort Collins in Colorado. Those are the two areas that keep these kinds of weird medications that could cause those deaths and diseases, and people's resistance could be down at the time of the planning of the killing or having a coup in Cuba. They're very anxious to do it, and they're very open about what they intend to do. I received from one of the subscribers to my tapes an article from the San Francisco Examiner. It's about the Vatican and the Pope and how the Pope appointed a new archbishop in the Polish capital. But then the article goes on to say this particular bishop visited Rome last week and led a group of Poles to St. Peter's Square to listen to a tape message from the Pope recovering from a suicide attempt. It's interesting that the Examiner described the shooting of the Pope, of course it's just an error, but it's an interesting thing that it got through the press that because we don't hear much about the assailant, either the one that shot at Ronald Reagan or the Pope, it's interesting that the news carried it as a suicide. The Pope isn't going to Lourdes. He's supposed to go this week. He's too sick to go to Lourdes. That was in the Los Angeles Times, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Lourdes is a place where Catholic people go to be cured for various diseases, and the Pope turned down an invitation to attend the Eucharist Congress in Lourdes. It'll be 2 days from now because he has a virus and blood condition from the surgery wounds that when he was shot May 13th. If Lourdes could cure the Catholics, he ought to go there and get cured. That's where they go in wheelchairs and crutches, and if he believes in Lourdes and lures the other Catholics on, maybe he ought to go there. Another article, last week I mentioned the Vatican's losing money, and this is a very serious thing because it ties in with American banks and organized crime and the possible motive for shooting the Pope at this time, the interlocking links of this Pope with Pope Paul VI and the way the money transacted out of the Vatican into other sources. This week they had an update. The Vatican is feeling another $26 million pinch, the most dramatic growth of the deficit that they faced so far. It'll double next year, and they had figures of last year's loss. And then the article from the paper this week said the Vatican will have trouble raising money because if the Pope has to curtail his public appearances and travel plans because of his injuries, the Church will be in worse financial situations, and that they help raise money when he travels. I remember when he took a trip to the Philippines this last year, and they had just announced a $19 million deficit. And I said he went over there to pick it up from the Marcos. He can travel and pick up money. This article says that they do, in fact, pick up money when he travels, so he better get well soon. And just one more comment about that, because I've done so many programs on the Vatican and their problems linked to the American intelligence community and various banking scandals that are taking place. They're planning a great big trip for the Pope to Great Britain, and this was described in a newspaper in New York, the New York Post. A man who built a financial empire of sports people, tennis people and other sports, Mark McCormick, is arranging the trip of the Pope, a $2 million a day papal visit to Britain next year, and they're going to sell him like a superstar. And they're arranging, the people that arrange sports events are going to handle the Pope's trip as soon as he gets well. I guess that'll take care of some of the deficit. I just bring this up. It's interesting to me, the complications of the way an organization that was so wealthy and so powerful all of a sudden came to lose so much money. And they said they'd have to raise money from the churches around the country and the various Catholics because they're in such dire straits. The entrapment of people with swindlers doesn't fall just to single individuals. Here's a whole institution like the Vatican that's in such trouble. And it's a shame. I don't feel sorry for them, but it's a shame that countries like Israel that are religious countries, or the Vatican that is a religious institution, and other agencies that are allegedly for religious purposes get tangled with organized crime, with mob figures, with warfare states, with the CIA, with intelligence communities. It's a shame that they get tangled and brought down to the level of these people and then have to go begging for money while the mob keeps rolling in all its money for dope and heroin and cocaine and illicit drug traffic, prostitution and extortion and you name it, and can even tangle an institution like the Vatican into its control and tie up its finances the way it managed to do. I have mentioned on the program when I talked about the shooting of Ronald Reagan, the Hinkley family, John Hinkley Sr. We don't see much of John Hinkley Jr. He's not going to be visible, I guess, till August, and maybe they'll indict him for the shootout in Washington of 4 people, including the President of the United States. But in April, several months ago, I talked about an organization that the Hinkley family was involved in, World Vision, because the night or the next day after Ronald Reagan was supposed to die, the Hinkley family was allegedly moving to Guatemala. And I mentioned a quotation from the Wall Street Journal about the Hinkley family that John Jr. belonged to this white supremacy group, and its avowed purpose was to preserve the memory of Hitler, but that the family, his father, was a consultant to World Vision International. Some of you might remember that. I talked about that it was described in the Wall Street Journal as a huge interdenominational aid organization with projects in 85 third world countries. And World Vision was described in a magazine called Christian Century as being part of the AID Defense Pentagon program in Cambodia, in Southeast Asia, in Biafra, Algeria, that they prolonged the war, the civil war, and funded money over there, and that they had ties to the CIA and participated with U.S. military activities. And I think it's important because of their links to the Pentagon and the CIA, because the Bush family were friendly with the Hinkley family, and the sons were to have dinner the next night. If Ronald Reagan, the night after the shooting, these two sons were to get together. And there were certain common denominators between the Houston, Texas area, John Connally, Edward Bennett Williams, the attorney for Hinkley's son. There was a group of people from Houston, Texas, and the Southwest there, and Denver, Colorado, that was very close, and I referred to them, this was last April, about the World Vision and the CIA. Now, this last week, I got from the Salvadorian Wire Service some more information about World Vision, and particularly their activity in Honduras and Guatemala, and that they work for the CIA, and that it is a spy front. That's what they're saying down in Salvador. And it's interesting because the Salvadorian invasion of American troops was to cause these people to go over to Guatemala and Honduras as refugees. And in those areas, World Vision set up their headquarters to receive them and indoctrinate the people, to spy on them, to cause arrests of people who managed to get out of El Salvador. And the Salvadorian Wire Service was making connections this past week to World Vision. And the family, as I say, of John Hinckley Sr. has strong tentacles in Guatemala. And I think that the people, the Pentagon and the CIA, Bush, George Bush, the Vice President, Alexander Haig, John Connally, John Hinckley Sr., and we don't know how close John Hinckley Jr. was to his dad, all have a relationship to events down in Central America that should be opened up. I don't think that sequestering John Hinckley Jr. Should just silence who the family is or what they have and their connecting links to the bloodbath in Central America. I think there's much to be opened up there. And as I say, the Salvadoran press has an article, North American religious sect involved in police work. Over 100,000 Salvadoran refugees located in Guatemala and Honduras have accused the North American World Vision of ties to the CIA. This news release says that World Vision Church Group are accused of spying and informing on those fleeing the civil war in El Salvador. The vision is located throughout refugee camps and preaches misleading doctrines such as stay away from the priest, don't touch the priest, Fidel Castro will take your children from you, communism will take everything you have. Here they have left El Salvador and everything that they ever had, and they're told not to trust the priests who are helping them at the refugee camps. I'll take a 1-minute break, and I want to do a little more about World Vision and some other interconnecting links that are important. We'll take a 1-minute break and then get back to that.
This concludes the first half of World Watchers International with Mae Brussell. We will return with the second half after a brief pause.
This John Hinckley Sr. is active, as I say, in World Vision, active in Guatemala, and World Vision has been charged with being a Defense Department CIA operation. The Salvadorian press said several persons arrested in Guatemala and Honduras in April 1981 fingered World Vision as the principal suspect, as informing on those particular prisoners, and that they warned these people who come over from El Salvador to stay away from priests and Catholic workers, and they are turning those that flee, who are still political, they're turning in their names, and there's a list of people that have been arrested with blaming World Vision as doing the job. This article from the Salvadoran press said the mentality of the ministers of World Vision is so primitive that Ronald Reagan could be their student, and it quotes a particular priest, Father Milla, who is talking about World Vision threatening the refugees and telling them to forget the atrocities that they suffered. Many of them saw families wiped out, tortured, people shot in front of them, and they fled. They said, forget the atrocities, because wherever there is war, there is sin, and that they should reject any theology of liberation or politics. And what they're trying to do is to get them to identify with Christians in North America. Forget the war, forget atrocities, trust us, and believe in us. And World Vision is silent about the oppressions. They have nothing to say about the kidnapping, the assassinations of refugees, and they don't talk to the Salvadoran military and paramilitary as being cruel to the people in Central America. They're just fingered as spies. And then the article from the Salvadoran press says that World Vision are spies. They're spying on these people, these refugees, that they have a history of being spies with the CIA in Cambodia, that they interfered with the Cambodian-Laos conflict. I mentioned that before, that they pressured Guyana to admit exiles from Laos and Cambodia, that in Guyana they took people from Laos and Cambodia to put them in the Guyanese army for 5 to 7 years with no pay to make them slaves, and then turn them into intelligence agents at the end of 7 years. This is down in Guyana with Burnham, just 2 years after the Jonestown tragedy. The World Vision showed up in Somalia to aid right-wing refugees fleeing Ethiopia. In Thailand, they aided the CIA, who fled Kampuchea. In Zimbabwe in 1979, the CIA agents used the cover World Vision to pressure Brazil and Bolivia to get resettlement of white fascist Rhodesians, South Africans, and segregationists down there. Bolivia accused World Vision of bringing in Vietnamese to compete with their working opportunities, refugees in that country, into Bolivia, and there was a lot of narcotics traffic in Southeast Asia, and many of those Laotians and the tribesmen and the Vietnamese were brought to South America under the guise, according to the Salvadoran press, of World Vision. They were brought into the country. The U.S. Protestant religious spy group has been denounced around the world, according to the El Salvadoran press, and they are hurting people in Guatemala and Honduras. Now, that's where John Hinckley Sr. was going to move down to Guatemala just at the time Ronald Reagan was to be killed or to die, and he was to work with World Vision and that organization. Incidentally, Panama City just kicked out various people from another church group. They expelled 20 American members of the Summer Institute of Linguistics. Those are the Bible translators. There was a death last year in Colombia of Charles Bitterman, and the people in Colombia said that these were agents of the CIA. They're in Ecuador in May and asked to leave the South American nation. And a lot of countries of people who are oppressed are catching on that the church is being used by the CIA to influence the native population. So even in Panama City, that runs military schools for our police academies for the intelligence community, they've expelled this group, the Bible translators, the Wycliffe group, and said that they are CIA and they don't want them in their country. Last week, I talked a little bit about David Murdock, but I want to go back to that because the interlocking or the possible links of Murdock in Los Angeles to the John Hinckley family and the modus operandi that I've been talking about. It's a complicated web, and I didn't want to run through this name. I want you to remember this name, and if you have a pencil, write it down, because in 1979 there was a story about Murdock in Fortune. I didn't see it, and I'll have to look that up. But this is the only article that's ever been given, and this is the way the LA Times describes him. And I mentioned some of that, and last week I want to get it clear, the name, because I think it's going to show up a lot in the next few years in this state and at a national level. David Murdock is worth approximately $500 million. He has a Los Angeles-based operation that's wholly owned by himself. Factories, warehouses, raw land, office buildings, antique furniture in London, stockpiles of stocks, investments in oil, in meat, textile, and cosmetics. One of his textile plants that he just sold a share part last week was the Dan River, and I want to go into that too. He's a big man behind Mike Curb, who will probably be our governor, because I think the Democrats are too lazy and stupid to get out and campaign or investigate anything about Mike Curb. So they'll let him slide in like they let Reagan in as president. He's already raised $1 million for Mike Curb, and the election's 2 years away. He's financial chairman of the state Republican Party, Mr. Murdock, and he carefully works with Curb, and he wants to get a kitchen cabinet around him, just as the one that organized Ronald Reagan's campaign from 1965 to 66 until he became a governor of California. Now, Murdock is from Arizona. He started in Arizona. He went from Michigan to Arizona, and he owns the Stair and Company London Antiques. He's very, very close to John Connally, and Connally is one of the big movers or common denominators. This Edward Bennett Williams, who's the attorney for John Hinkley Jr., is also the attorney for John Connally at the time of Watergate. Connally was Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Treasury. He was the governor of Texas. He knows where the bodies are buried in Texas and who killed John Kennedy, and he belongs to all the CIA, Defense Department agencies that have covered up Kennedy's murder. And David Murdock is very close to John Connally, helps him with his ranches and buying his cattle and so forth, and advises him on his various investments. All of the property that Murdock owns is private. Nobody can get into it. There is a review sometimes of his stocks, because there's $200 million in stocks and the rest is totally owned. In 1979, when Robert Haldeman got out of prison, he was a former chief of staff for Richard Nixon. Haldeman was hired by Murdock. Murdock said, well, I didn't see anything that he did that was illegal, but the point is that Haldeman was never investigated for many of the crimes that took place at the time of Watergate. He's vice president of Murdoch's development company. Now, Mr. Clement Stone hired Dwight Chapin, the appointment secretary. As soon as Watergate came down, he went right to Chicago, and Dorothy Hunt had the plane crash in Chicago, Howard Hunt's wife. And then Chapin went to jail and was on a full salary by Clement Stone in Chicago, who's close to many of these people, Edward Bennett Williams and John Connally and so forth. And Dwight Chapin got a job in Chicago, and Haldeman got a job with Murdock out here in California. He went on to say in this article in the LA Times that he has Haldeman working for him, but he didn't commit a crime or destroy anybody or anything. Well, they never investigated the Michael Sindona connections to the Republican Party, to the connections of John Connally and his best friend and Claire Luce, or William Colby, the CIA, and their links to Sindona and the Vatican Bank and the meetings they had regarding the Vatican, or the shooting of George Wallace, or the killing of Mary Jo Kopechne, or the LSD that was given to Muskie to keep him from being a presidential candidate, or the 30 deaths of primary witnesses right after Watergate. He didn't do anything illegal or didn't commit a crime, because the crimes were never investigated. So he says, I'm free to hire Haldeman, and Haldeman has no intention of becoming involved in politics. We agreed on that when he was hired. Well, how can you not be involved in politics when this man is head of the Republican Party in California and he's your boss? He's already raising millions of dollars for the next governor and so forth. He's not exactly a Reagan man, this LA Times article said, and this is the part that gets scary. He's close to Barry Goldwater. He's close to Robert Haldeman. He's close to John Connally and George Bush. Now, all of these people could be people behind the assassination attempt of Ronald Reagan. There's a can of worms here that is very thick, that goes back a long time. And this man is putting money into a group of people that were opposed to Ronald Reagan. At the time of Watergate, there were articles, I brought a few of them in. One, Mrs. Nixon blames Haldeman for her husband's demise. They didn't trust Haldeman, and there were secrets about Robert Haldeman at the time of Watergate. We could do an entire program on. There was an article in Playboy about Haldeman talking to Charles Colson, and he said, You can have leaks about Robert Mayu or Larry O'Brien, but leave out Bibi Rebozo, leave out Robert Bennett at all costs. Haldeman was a manipulator. He brought in Butterfield, Alexander Butterfield from the Pentagon, who was out in Australia waiting to be called to Washington, and he bugged the President of the United States. Haldeman was close to teams that had the money to take care of Dorothy Hunt, to pay off witnesses, to have death threats against certain people like Jack Anderson and many, many others. James McCord was threatened with death if he didn't take a certain position. That takes money, and there was money in Haldeman's desk, and there was the technique. Even Haldeman was arrested by the Secret Service, or was going to be arrested because he was jeopardizing the life of Richard Nixon. And Richard and Pat Nixon had no great feelings for Robert Haldeman. They considered him an enemy. And now Haldeman is working with David Murdock, who is close to Goldwater, and Connally, and the whole Bush and that gang that I feel have been too close through the years and too linked to a lot of seamy operations. This Murdock hired him, Haldeman, as I say, and with his close proximity to Barry Goldwater, it makes me wonder how much influence that new appointee, Sandra O'Connor, will have on the Supreme Court. She used to date that crook, that Kleindienst in Arizona. She's very, very close to Barry Goldwater. Here is a woman coming out of the Supreme Court that comes right out of Phoenix, Arizona, which is David Murdock's home base, who's close to Connally, not Connally, but Barry Goldwater, who is approved by everybody right off the bat. Nothing could be wrong with Sandra O'Connor, and there may not be, but the base roots of Murdock and his political cronies comes out of Arizona. And I think that it'd be hard to get a fair decision on some of the tangled web of conspiracies if we were lucky enough to ever get to a Supreme Court, because her roots are exactly where people like Murdock have tremendous investments, and their roots are still financially there. He's raising money for a lot of Republicans. He's the angel, as I say, in Mike Kerb's campaign. He helped Ed Davis in California to become a senator. Ed Davis was the chief of police in Los Angeles who ran the criminal conspiracy section of the Los Angeles Police Department. He was described by Louis Tackwood in his book, The Glass House Tapes, as the man who planned to kill Richard Nixon at Squad 19 in Ed Davis's offices, where they were going to kill Richard Nixon at the time of the nomination, of the Republican nomination, and make Agnew president. Here is a group of cronies, Haldeman suspected by Nixon and his wife, and not trusting them. Ed Davis, who worked with Squad 19, and E. Howard Hunt, and Gordon Liddy, and John Connally. And Murdock has this whole team of Haldeman, Connally, Kerb, and Davis. And Mike Kerb, of course, was very close to Ken Reitz and Robert Haldeman. And they also had secret funds and secret teams that interlocked that could have been investigated at the time of Watergate and weren't. And now they're working very closely now. Haldeman and Ken Reitz worked in Washington, D.C. with this secret money. This had another tail to it that could possibly link the funds to the Wallace shooting. And this Murdock, David H. Murdock, in Los Angeles, has been helped Ed Davis become a senator in California. He was in the Air Force, World War II, went to Detroit, Michigan, got some money and moved to Phoenix in 1946. That's the year that the CIA was formed. From 45 to 47, it was finalized. And then he parlayed one little house to a lot of homes, to shopping centers, to office buildings, to Murdock Plaza and Wilshire Boulevard, and became quite wealthy and quite a large career without too much. There are not too many details, of course, in just one little article. He was investigated for fraud in a union tile company in 1964. Some scandal in Phoenix, they said that he left Phoenix and came to California in 64, that there was a gap in the story from 64 to 74 of where he was. But in 1974, and I mentioned last week, he acquired the Pacific Holding Company, which is a large firm in Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Times describes Pacific Holding Company as no great details, publicly traded Los Angeles firm that he took the controlling stock in, and He runs this Pacific Holding Company, and I wondered if it had any links to the Pacific Holding Company of the CIA and the Guggenheim Bank, with his links to Connally and Bush and Haldeman and that tangled web of Goldwater. I'm wondering if it is the same company. Now, the Wall Street Journal had an article about Murdock that may give a little more clue, and I think this is important, and I want you to remember that name, David Murdock. It said that Murdock firm lowers its stake in Dan River. In essence, what the Wall Street Journal said, this is July the 2nd, was that David Murdock owned an international mining corporation. He controls it. And that corporation has 1/3 of the shares of Dan River cotton items from Greenville, South Carolina. He sold 150,000 shares, so he still has 300,000 shares. Now, international mining, according to Wall Street Journal, has its headquarters in New York City. It's a mining, natural resources, and real estate holding. International has investment overseas, and it's a subsidiary of the Pacific Holding Company. Last week I talked about Pacific Holding Company because of the CIA company called Pacific Holding from Australia that has to do with the Green Berets, with narcotics traffic, with CIA assassination hit teams, with offices in Hawaii and other places. Now, this Pacific Holding this company of Murdoch's is linked to the international mining. And of course, I can't figure out by the article in the Wall Street Journal what countries or where the mining is, because the family of John Hinkley Jr. Has Vanderbilt Energy and Vanderbilt Resources, which I described as having money from overseas, and again, into international mining. They're into mining and minerals and resources. The Wall Street Journal describes the natural resources of the Hinkley family, and Murdock has the International Mining Corporation, which controls Dan River Cottons, based in New York, and his Pacific Holding Company, which is supposed to be California, is based out of New York also. Pacific Holding is in Los Angeles, but the international mining is out of New York. So the open question, which I'm sure the answers will come someday, if we ask the right questions, the answers will come. Is there any connecting link between John Hinkley Sr. to David Murdock in Los Angeles, to the common denominators, of course, John Connally, George Bush, the Goldwaters, the mining stakes, the similarity in operations, and team members associated with each other that have been linked to past political assassinations and murders. And to complicate that and finalize this program, I've mentioned briefly and never done enough on the program on the takeover of the Monterey Peninsula, the Pebble Beach area, and the links to 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox was run by an admiral from Annapolis, and he resigned just a few weeks ago. And he sold the 20th Century, which used to be on the stock market, as a private company. Mr. Stanfield, he was a classmate of Jimmy Carter at Annapolis. He sold 20th Century Fox to Marvin Davis, who is a very close friend of Frank Sinatra from Denver, Colorado. Again, the home base of the John Hinkley family in Denver, Colorado. And the attorney for Marvin Davis is Edward Bennett Williams, the same attorney for John Hinkley Jr., the same office. And this last week, he appointed some new board members to 20th Century Fox, among them former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Washington lawyer Edward Bennett Williams, and Gerald Ford. Now, Ford was on the Warren Commission and hid very successfully the assassination of John Kennedy. He's part of the assassination team. Henry Kissinger has been part of the assassination teams of killing prominent people down the line, whether it was Diem or Letelier or Allende or John Kennedy and prominent politicians. Kissinger has been a part of that early in his career and as Secretary of State and afterwards hiding it. And also on the board of directors of 20th Century Fox is Madame Chennault from Flying Tigers, and many of you know that may ring some bells with her reputation and the suspicion of narcotics traffic during the Vietnamese War with the Flying Tigers. So you have Gerald Ford, Henry Kissinger, Edward Bennett Williams, and Frank Sinatra working with Marvin Davis on this. They're from Denver, Colorado, and Gerald Ford's up there, the head of 20th Century Fox. Now, 20th Century Fox owns Pebble Beach. That's our own area up here in Carmel. And when Marvin Davis bought 20th Century Fox, there was an article in the newspaper that it had been sold. He sold the Pebble Beach part to a foreign country, an Arab oil country. Wouldn't say which one it was. And Grace Kelly is on the board too, the famous, notorious Grace Kelly, who has in Monte Carlo the offices of Samuel Cummings, the financier and funder of weapons for assassination teams all over the world, sends weapons and purchases from Mitchell Werbel, funds and arms Frank Turple, George Corcola, Edmund Wilson, Theodore Shackley, the CIA gang. Samuel Cummings' home base is London. His offices are in Monte Carlo. He's the brother-in-law of Senator Tower of Texas on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. There are common denominators between these people in their energy activities, in their dummy fronts, the sources of their money, their secrecy, the links to the past history that has never been opened up, to the manipulation of our political process. We have a group of people, I believe, in our own area, getting local, that have earmarked, and I've watched for a while, we've been divided like a piece of pie. The Carmel Valley, the Big Sur, the Pacific Grove, and the Pebble Beach. And when you get people like Marvin Davis coming in with Henry Kissinger and Grace Kelly and Madame Chennault and Gerald Ford and Edward Bennett Williams, that is a lot of power into an organization or a group, and they seem to be a buddy system that have gotten very close through the years, working their way, weaving in and out of various exposés of political assassinations and independent wars, like against Laos or Cambodia or in African countries or in the Central America. These people have been expert at it and have interlocking links of the intelligence community, of narcotics people that deal in narcotics and organized crime, from the State Department on down to the street scene. They have their Noxie, they mingle everywhere, from royalty to the common street folks, in that they have control of various segments of our society, and they are surfacing in various articles at this time. And I think that new 20th Century Fox board is interesting, and I think the appointment of this woman, Sandra O'Connor, to the Supreme Court, coming as a close kissing buddy of Mr. Goldwater, Barry Goldwater, who's so linked with this gang, is an interesting appointment, and how universally she's accepted. The best thing about her is that she makes me feel like I'm 18 again, and I look at her and I feel like she looks like the image we had when we were in college. When I was in college, I expected her to pull up in the jump seat of a car on the running board, or she's sort of locked back into that era, and she looks pretty sweet and cute as a new justice of the Supreme Court. But she's got some tough buns in Arizona, and don't think for a minute that she doesn't have her Noxie. That's the state that suppressed the murder of Don Bowles, a reporter, and organized crime, holds onto the media and the investigations very tightly. That's one of the hearts of organized crime in the United States, and Goldwater's got a cute little Supreme Court justice there to take care of things, and I'm sure that she knows what to do in those matters. One last article, there was a question in the newspaper maybe 2 weeks ago, who are the people in Argentina who are paying Frank Sinatra $2 million to sing a few concerts in Buenos Aires this summer? And the answer is Polito Ortega, one of Argentina's most popular vocalists, is setting up a recording operation. He offered Sinatra $1,650,000 to go down. I mentioned before, a few weeks ago, the link of Frank Sinatra to Argentina. And, of course, these are the repressive governments where a lot of pain and sorrow is going on and continues to go on, but these people just flaunt their activities with the multinationals and the wealthy and don't seem to care who knows what they're doing or who they hurt in the process of doing it. The name of the game seems to be have a good time and ignore the masses that seem to be suffering from the profits and the exploitation of this new kind of cafe society that has rolled in Kissinger, Gerald Ford, Frank Sinatra, Marvin Davis buying up movie companies and corporate heads. It's interesting and it's sad. Our our Attorney General, William French Smith, had a press conference recently, and Jack Anderson had an article, Smith Looks at Crime, and William French Smith is trying to figure out what to do with organized crime. Why doesn't he look at the cabinet figures that Ronald Reagan has appointed? And I don't have time tonight to read in the ridiculous amount of people that have been arrested just in the last month involved with millions of dollars of crime and drug traffic. These are linked to the biggies, and they're let off and their bail is reduced. How can the Attorney General talk about crime when these people are floating around with so much money and every day there's an article in the paper? There was just one Examiner last week, $2,500 reward for an opium king. In Thailand, a man responsible for 70% of the opium in the world who sent $27 billion of opium into the United States and Europe last year, $27 billion. His name is Kun Sa. He disappeared out of Thailand, and there's a $2,000 reward. Who would turn in that character for $2,000 when he distributes $27 billion worth of narcotics in the United States? Finally, may I have time for one other story that French Smith might go into. I mentioned, months ago about a man who had a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called the Golden Table Restaurant. He's a nephew, I believe, of Bakhtiar from Iran, and he was arrested. He imported $32 million worth of heroin last year, and the Washington Post has an article this week. Judge reduces the drug sentence of restaurateur by 6 months. He got out. He was supposed to be in jail for 3 years, but they had to reduce his sentence because the article said it was hurting his business. The businessman, his life was ruined, and he was having trouble with his restaurant because his reputation was ruined. So the drug dealer in Washington had his sentence reduced 6 months so that he could get out. He was supposed to serve 3 years. He's only going to serve 18 months in jail. And he imported $32 million of heroin into Washington, D.C. last year. 2 years ago. Isn't that ridiculous? 18 months in jail for $32 million of heroin. And the Attorney General is a few blocks away in Washington, D.C., and is trying to figure out what we should do about drugs and the crimes caused by the drug traffic. All they have to do, if they pulled in 8 or 10 of the big dealers that they're looking for, half the problem would be solved, but they'll let them out, and that's the way it goes. Well, we'll get back next week. The time is up now. Keep in mind the name David Murdock. Watch Fox Studio, watch these international, because they do affect our lives, and I think there's an interweaving of these people that I'll continue to work on and update it maybe 6 months from now, but the cast of characters involved in the Hinkley family and the Murdock operation and in the past investigations overlaps too much for me to feel comfortable about, so I thought I would share it with you. In the meantime, this is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California, and I'll be back with you next week.
This has been World Watchers International with noted conspiracy investigator Mae Brussell. This program originates from Carmel, California.